topic today is this question of minyanim, making a minyan under the conditions of coronavirus. And there's been really a few different debates, a few different very new approaches to how to make a minyan that we've seen, and we're going to explore them. We're going to focus on where the debate first emerged, which primarily has been Bnei, Brak, and other communities in Israel. It's really much broader than that. But what I describe as Bnei, Brak, Balconies, and Barchu, the debate over minyan that we've seen in Israel. So we'll jump in now to we'll jump into the handout, which hopefully everyone now can see. And there's really a wonderful picture in Makor Rishon newspaper, or a artistic rendition of what it's like, or what it's often like in many places where, in Israel, there's many communities where people live in large apartment buildings with mirpasot, with balconies or porches, and this is an attempt to reconstitute Judaism on the porches. So you have a chuppah with the chassan and kala on two different buildings. You have someone doing hagbah across the way, and you even have a bris milah. I think that's maybe a little wishful to be able to pull that off through social distancing with the mole on one side of the baby on the other. But just a very nice depiction of how in many places, especially in Israel, the attempt is to continue religious ritual at a distance. And just a written depiction by Miriam Kosman, who's an important author in the Haredi community, who lives in Bnei Brak, and she writes about how this a few weeks ago, this was on April 5th, following that first Shabbos when everything was closed, where she says the assumption was everyone was going to not have a minyan, everything was going to be closed. But then turns out they were porch minyanim, and it helped that the porches in Bnei Brak are not one on top of the other, but are sort of staggered. Usually for sukkahs, that's very helpful for having sukkahs not on top of each other. But it also helped for the minyanim. Everyone would go out onto their porch and make a minyan together. And she writes, and this is maybe the key that we're going to look at. She writes, the halacha is that if the 10 people who are part of the minyan can see each other, that is still called a minyan, even if they are not under the same roof. So people participated from all the way down the block. And she said basically every block, every apartment complex had at least one minyan, if not multiple minyanim, and just a wonderful depiction of people having community, building religious community at a distance. She even talks about how there was a Birchas Kohanim, the priestly blessing, and they read the Torah. They set it up on the table. Someone read really loudly, was corrected. So our question is going to be: this is truly a wonderful, beautiful depiction, both artistic and written, of what's been going on in Bnei Brak the last few weeks. And now these restrictions are being eased in Israel, but in many communities in Israel, the past few weeks, and now in America, certainly in Lakewood. As of a week and a bit ago, there's been a lot of discussion of having what they call porch minyanim, because people more often have houses rather than apartments, and some places in Brooklyn. This idea of having a minyan at a distance. People are not in the same room. They're not in a shul. The shuls are all closed. People are on their porches. Can you have a minyan across different buildings? So we're going to jump into some of the Halakhic sources, both classical and more recent. There's really been an interesting controversy over this, although as you saw in practice, most people are certainly in communities that are overwhelmingly Jewish and observant, people are holding these minyanim. It's actually a whole question as to whether that's appropriate or not. So we're going to explore that. We start with the Gemara in Sota, where there's this wonderful throwaway line talking about whether people am she'acharei kohanim einam b'chlal bracha, whether people who are behind the Kohanim during Birchas Kohanim, the Kohanim stretch out their arms. What if you're behind them? You're sort of not receiving the bracha. Does that work or not? And Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says, afilu mechitza shel barzel, even an iron curtain, so to speak, eina mafsekes bein Yisrael avim shabashamayim, can't separate between Jews and their Father in heaven, meaning no separation, no mechitza should ever be able to break up that religious connection. And you might argue based on that you can always form a minyan across whatever distances. Although this is generally understood as teaching that once you have a minyan, which would generally be defined as having the quorum in one place, in one room, then additional people beyond the 10 can participate, can be a part of the minyan at a distance. But generally, this is not understood as saying that you can form a minyan with people in different places, this Gemara. And in fact, that's, if we jump to source 4, that's codified here. Hayu asara b'makom echad v'omrim kaddish v'kedusha. If you have a minyan of 10 in one place, in the shul, and they're saying kaddish kedusha, all the dvarim shebekdusha, all the parts of davening that need a minyan, afilu misha eino imayim yachal lanos, even someone who's not there, who's not in the building, who's outside, can answer, can participate. Some people say that that only works as long as there's no idolatry or disgusting things between the minyan and the participant. But generally, you can join to an already existing minyan even if you're not already in place. But our question is, can you form the minyan itself if you don't have a quorum in place? Source number 3 here goes into also other details of how exactly, if you have trying to join the shliach tzibur with the tzibur, you want to have the chazan connect to the rest of the group, and they're in different rooms, or if you have a partial minyan in one place and not elsewhere. So tisha bigdola, the yachid bigtana, you have 2 adjoining rooms. If you have 9 towards your minyan in the large room and 1 person in the smaller room, mitzdarfin, that adds up because the smaller room is sort of swallowed up by the larger room, and that 1 person joins. Tisha bigtana ve'echa bigdola. But if you have the smaller room with 9 and 1 person in the bigger room, that they don't add up. It's not as if it's 1 room. What seems to come out of this is there are these complicated rules of how to have 1 person be swallowed up by the larger number. But it would seem like generally, if the whole group is disparate, is in different places, you can't just say, okay, 1 person, 1 porch, 1 person, another porch, all the people on the different porches come together to a minyan. It would sound like, just reading the straightforward Gemara, that this would not be allowed. The source that many of these recent tshuvos, these recent responses cite to possibly allow for adding up people in different places is the Shut HaRashba, a responsum of the Rashba in 13th, 14th century, where he's talking about a shul, an interesting setup in a shul, which apparently was common, although no longer, where he says, "Shehei shliach tzibur omed b'teva shigvoa asara v'rechava arba v'sheish lemechitzos gvoos." So instead of, they have a bima, the chazan would daven from the bima, but instead of it just being, a step up or something like that, it's really its own building. It's 10 tfachim high, it's 4 wide, it's its own platform. V'sheish lemechitzos gvoos. It has high walls going up. So it's almost like its own area. If you've seen, I think forgetting now, the Ramaz Shul maybe, they reconstructed it where the bima is not just a bima, but there's these walls going up. It's really like it's a room inside the building. So does that even work if your chazan's in a separate room? And he says, does that work to have the chazan do that? And as he writes, quotes Rishuv Levi, generally walls don't separate, but lo nemru divrei Yeshua el b'sheish asara b'makom shliach tzibur. That's right, but that's only if you have a full minyan with the chazan. You can't have a minyan in one place and a chazan somewhere else, a different location, and just have them work together. That shouldn't work. So he gives 2 suggestions as to how to solve the problem. He first says maybe the way that this shul is built. The reason why you have this high up platform for the chazan is in order for people to hear. So it's built that way in order to serve the rest of the shul, and maybe for that reason it's considered michlal beis haknesses. It's considered part of the shul. So he really is, because he is considered part of the building, even though structurally the chazan's in a different room, but since functionally it's meant to work together, that's the way the shul was built. Therefore, it's as if they're all in one big room, and that's not a problem at all. That's his first answer, not relevant for us. But then he gives another answer. Ani Omer, I also say she'ef sharlomar. It's possible to say, and those are important words. It's possible to say shekol sheroim elu es elu ki'ilu hein b'vayis echad dami umitzdarfin. As long as they can see each other, the various people in the minyan can see one another, that counts as if everyone's in one room. And you can be mitzdarif, you can join together to make a minyan, as long as you see each other. You don't need to be in the same room or the same building. You just need to see each other. Vidumya, he has a paradigm for this. Vidumya the zimun shel birchas hamazon. It's like benching. Ditnan. You can make a zimun even if you're not in the same room, as long as you can see each other. And then he says, he says, when it says bais, it doesn't just mean room, it means a whole building. Fine. But the point is, the way the rules he's suggesting, the way that the rules of minyan should work, should be just like zimun, just like joining together a bench, that you don't need to be in the same room, you just need to be able to see each other, and that's sufficient. So we have two different paradigms here. We have the straightforward reading of the Gemaras as they're seen by most, which is that you need a minyan in one place in order for that to work. Once you have a minyan in one place, other people outside can join, but to form that basic quorum, it needs to be in the same room. That's what seems to come out of the Gemaras, whereas the Rashba here is suggesting a different model, that roim elus elu, seeing each other, is also sufficient. That also counts to be in a minyan together. And the question now is, how do later halachas reconcile these different views, and how do they rule? So the most important source for this next level is the Shulchan Aruch and the Beis Yosef, right? The most important Halakhic code, and the Beis Yosef is his commentary or more extended writing that leads to that, where he talks about some positions that take various stances here. So we'll start halfway through source 6. Matzasi shekasav Rabbeinu Gadol Mari Abuev b'shem Gaon demachnis rosho b'chalon mitzdarif imayim leminyan asar v'lo chilik b'kach. So he has a position that if you stick your head in the window, that counts. You don't need to be in the building. As long as you stick your head in the window, that's good enough. And he quotes Rav Hai, Misha Omed. You're standing behind the shul. There's a window. Afilu gavoa kama komos. It's a very high window. Afilu in a rachav arba, and it's only a small window. Umar lahem panim misham, and he shows you his face. Mitzdarif imayim la'asara. So this opinion of Rav Hai Gaon seems to also be like that of the Rashba, that if you show your face, if you can see each other, it sounds like that's enough to join a minyan. So this is cited among many other opinions cited in the Beis Yosef, but at least he gives some credence to the view that seeing the face is enough to constitute a minyan. But then let's see what he says in Shulchan Aruch, in his code. So he starts off by saying, Sarich sheyu kol ha'asara b'makom echad u'shliach tzibur imayim. You need the core, the basic quorum of 10 to all be in one place, along with the chazan. You can't have the chazan in one room and the rest of the minyan elsewhere. You can't have 5 people one place, 5 elsewhere. You need to have them all in one location. If someone is sort of right on in the entranceway of the door, but they're slightly on the outside, and if you close the door, they'd be on the outside, they're considered outside. This is actually a halacha. Most of these halachos that we've been discussing are things that come up only now under these very extreme circumstances. But I had the experience of applying this halacha many, many times, especially this idea of being in the other side of the doorway. When I was the Orthodox rabbi at Yale, so we had very often, we have a relatively small community, very often our minyan would have just the bare minimum. And sometimes people, would stand sort of in the back of the room. There was this doorway right towards the back, and they'd sort of be a step in, a step out, back and forth. And I said, certainly under ideal circumstances, if we can, everyone should be inside the room participating in the minyan. You shouldn't take a step out, because as the Shulchan Aruch says, if you're on the outside of the doorway, you're considered in a different room. And then if you don't have your 10, you don't have your minyan. So you're putting the minyan at risk by going outside. This was a frequent topic of discussion. Actually, I just was reminiscing about this with a former student of mine. So it's relevant. It was relevant then, and it's relevant here under very different circumstances as well. But the Shulchan Aruch here, Paskins, he rules that you need to have the entire minyan in a room. But then the very next halacha, the very next sif, Misha Omer Achori Beis HaKnesses, if you're standing behind the shul, Uveneim Chalom, with a window, Afilu Gavoa Kama Komos, even if it's high up, and it seems like he's paraphrasing source 6, what he wrote in source 6. Even if it's small, you show your face from there. You can join up for a minyan. So it sounds like he contradicted himself. In source 13, he says everyone needs to be in the same room. In source 14, he says showing your face is sufficient. So what's his position? This is a bit of a problem that many commentators try to resolve. That's really at the crux of the early sources on this issue. The Rama, Rav Moshe Isserlis, the Ashkenazi parallel, rules similarly to halacha to Seif Yud Gimel, Gagin v'aliyos einon b'chlal bayis v'omid aleim einon mitzarif. If you have some people in a building and some people on the roof, those are considered different rooms and you can't join up. They don't add together. So it sounds like he's ruling, presumably even if they see each other, it sounds like he's ruling that seeing each other does not work fairly unequivocally. But what about the Shulchan Aruch? He seems to have contradicted himself between 13 and 14. And then just to make it even more complicated, in Seif Tesvav, the 15th passage there, im miktsasam bifnim, umiktsasam bachutz, if you have a minyan partially inside a building, partially outside, shliach tzibur, tocha besach, humitzarfan. The chazan is sort of in the doorway, 1 foot in one room, 1 foot in a different room. He can bring together the two different rooms, the two different groups, and make one minyan together. So what does that mean? Does that work because it's considered one big room? Does that work because you don't need to be in the same room? You just need to see each other? It's very unclear how to understand this Shulchan Aruch here. Just we'll quickly take a look at the halachos of Zimun, which we saw the Rashba cited, and the Beis Yosef seems to be, and the Shulchan Aruch seems to be paralleling, at least in some of the sources here, that the halacha is based on the Gemara and Brachos. If you have people eating in one house, bisman shemiksasin royal elu harielu mitzar from the Zimun. You can make a Zimun together, and im yesh shamash beineim, source number 9, shamash mitzarfin. If you have one person serving the meal, and two different rooms have two different meals, but one waiter serving both of them, shamash mitzarfin. He combines the group. So some people say the chazan, they draw the connection, the chazan leading the minyan is considered like the shamash, he's considered like the waiter. And the chazan can also join together the two different halves of the minyan. So that's the parallel that people make, the Rashba and maybe the Shulchan Aruch here in Seif Tesvav, that people make to benching, which is cited in source 10 in the Shulchan Aruch. But we still have this problem in the Shulchan Aruch. What does he really hold? Does he hold that you need all 10 to be in one room? Or can you have people in other rooms as long as they see one another? There's basically two different approaches to how to resolve the Shulchan Aruch here. One is that that source number, that Seif Yudalid, that talks about seeing each other, that's not talking about a normal case of seeing each other. That's talking about a case of, let's say, where you stick your head fully into the shul. So if you stick your head into the shul, that counts. Because we saw actually in source number 6, one of the sources he cited talks about that idea. Or maybe it's some other exceptional case like that. Or maybe it needs to be really connected. The two buildings can't be really separate. There needs to be some degree of connection between them, and then seeing is sufficient. But to just see each other at a large distance wouldn't work. That's one view. The other view is no. Source number 13 is either the standard case or a chumrah. So you get both explanations. Either it's a standard case, generally you need the whole minyan to be in a room. Alternatively, you have this other option of roim elu as elu. If they see each other, then they don't need to be in the room. But 13, Yud Gimel and Yud Daled are talking about alternate scenarios. That's one explanation. The other explanation is, some have raised, is sarich shiyu kol asar machmech. What does sarich mean? It means you need to be. So when you say you need to do something, does that mean it's absolutely necessary? It's indispensable. Without it, you don't have a minyan? Or are we saying sarich? It's preferable. It's certainly best for everyone to be in the same room. But if you can't do that, failing that, if you can see each other, that is also sufficient. So there's a bunch of different ways of explaining this. There's a huge debate among the Achronim, the later commentators, and there's views on both sides. We're going to take a look at some of these views. First, maybe the coolest source here in this context is the Chida. In his Machzik Bracha, a book he wrote, the Chida, he writes about, just take a look at the first word here, varandado, and he's writing in Italy. If it's a romantic language, so it's a veranda, right? He's talking about a very, very similar case to what we're talking about. Verandado shelamata bechatzer, the veranda that's below a courtyard, and he's talking about joining together two different groups. Chaveras Talmud Torah mispalim sham v'yesh lamala hey lamata hey ena mitzdarfim harav Shairi. He's quoting Rav Shairi on the matter, and in the Knesset Gdol, and then a bunch of other sources. But the point is, it's a very similar scenario to what we have. You have two different areas and 2 different levels, really. You have, the veranda over here with 5 people. You have another platform over there, or the courtyard there with 5 people. Can you join for the minyan or not? And he raises a whole bunch of opinions. Some say it worked. Some say Einam Mitztarfin, they don't join up. Some say Mitztarfin, they do join up. They argue back and forth. He quotes the Pri Chadash, who says you can join, and part of the question is whether Mina Agaf L'chutz K'L'chutz, Hainu K'She'ein Ro'in Zeh. If people are in different rooms, that doesn't make a minyan. Is that only if they don't see each other, or even if they do see each other, as we just discussed? So, is sight sufficient to make a minyan, or do you need to be in the same room as well? In the end, he says, "Mikol Malkom Mecholdos Ner Deladina Natinan K'Rav Shairi." Will be stringent like Rav Shairi. The reason why this is so cool, and it only exists. I typed this up, so there may be some errors, but this is the printed edition and the Chida lived in the late 18th century. So we know where he lived at this time. Towards the end of his life, he lived in Livorno in Italy, even though he grew up in Jerusalem, in Yerushalayim. But this is the area that he lived, known as the Lazaretto in Livorno. And it makes you wonder, like you're looking, you say, well, are one of these things, one platform and the other one's another platform? You can try to reconstruct maybe exactly the scenario that he's talking about. He also goes into, and others have noted, we know that when he first came to Livorno, I think it was maybe 1776 or something like that, not a terribly interesting year in Italy, but at the time he had to go into quarantine because he came from Eretz Yisrael, and there may have been some diseases, and he actually wrote Shem Agdolim, his book about giving biographies of the different Talmudic greats while in quarantine. So maybe this question, he doesn't give more details, but maybe this question is about what to do in quarantine. You have, one group quarantined here with 5, one group quarantined there with 5. What do you do? Maybe that's what the background here is. So this is a very, very interesting and possibly directly parallel scenario from, over 200 years ago. He ends up discussing the Rashba that we spoke about, and the reason why he partially discounts the Rashba. Remember, the Rashba had been lenient and he suggested that maybe a minyan can be constituted by sight rather than being in the same place. He says, "Me'achar de Rashba derech efshar amra." The Rashba only said it as a maybe. You say it could be, right? Efshar, it's possible. He didn't say it serious. He didn't say it with certainty. And the Rashbash, a different Rishon, says that it doesn't work. So, why would you favor the Rishon who's not even sure over the one who is sure? So for that reason, he wants to be stringent. The Aruch HaShulchan, here in source number 12, says that even if you want to join people through sight, that only works if they're not really in 2 totally separate areas. So he says, let's say you're in, one person's in the shul, one person's out around the window right outside. Maybe you can join 2 people together in that scenario. If it's not really a full wall, it's sort of a semi-open, semi-closed. But certainly, and we don't know exactly how these are constructed, but if you have people in the Ezras Nashim in the women's section, they couldn't, presumably that would be some raised platform, they wouldn't join with those in the main area of the shul. Presumably it would be 2 separate areas. Since it's 2 separate buildings or 2 separate rooms, then you can't be mitzaref across that. You can't join for a minyan across that barrier. This actually is an interesting question that's been raised the last few decades about whether technically, in Orthodox halacha, women are not counted towards the minyan, but towards the basic quorum of 10. But there's a question as to whether they are considered like an adjunct. They're just like an adjunct to be added to the minyan, just like the 11th or 12th man, etc. And this is one of the sources that would say they're not, because they're in a different area. Whereas others argue that no, the mechitza, certainly the mechitza, the way where it's not on a different plane, but it's sort of just a thin wall, maybe that doesn't count as a separate area, and maybe women do participate, could count as part of the tzibur. That's another topic for a whole other discussion. Came up significantly, I think, in the 90s, the late 90s, but for another time. Fine. So these sources that we saw, the Chida and the Aruch HaShulchan, wanted to be stringent and said you can't really join a minyan. But there are other sources, the Pri Chadash, who was actually cited by the Chida, who says if you can see each other, you can join up based on the Rashba, and he rules like that we can rely on this position. So that's one of the lenient sources, and most significantly for our purposes, the Mishnah Brura from the early 20th century, which is regarded by many, especially in the Haredi world, as the final word in halacha, as really the default halacha in all cases. So the Mishnah Brura writes, "Uktsasam ba'azara hu adin afilu im tes b'beis hakneses v'yachid ba'azara." Fine. He Kazav Prima Gadim, he quotes him in a couple of sifim. Mari b'she'enan ro'en zeh. What the Shulchan Aruch says that you can't join together in different rooms. That's only if you don't see each other. The bero'en zeh afilu b'shnei batim mamish mitzdarfin dumya dezimun. If you're in two different rooms, even two different buildings, you can join as long as you see each other, just like by benching. So that's how he rules. V'yesh machmirim afilu bero'im. Some people are more stringent, even if you see each other, if you're in different places. And now importantly, in a case where of difficulty, where one's under pressure, for example, where there are government distancing regulations, where you can't form a minyan in person, many have said, there's room to be lenient and to allow people to form a minyan even though you're not in the same place. And the Bir Halacha, his more extensive commentary, he notes, it's better to be stringent under normal circumstances, but under non-ideal circumstances, there's room to be lenient. So this is very important. If the Mishnah Brura says something is permitted, even if he says it's permitted under difficult circumstances, you can bet that many people in the Ashkenazi world will rely on him, even if it's against many other achronim, many other late sources. And one complicating factor is, as you see in the picture here, and many other ones, very often if you have two apartment buildings with balconies facing one another, you'll have a street in between. So can you make a minyan across the street? That's something that comes up a lot. In this picture here, you have a fellow reading the Torah to people presumably across the neighborhood, across streets in different areas. So does that work? Can you form a minyan across the street? So if we recall, the model allowing for minyan based on sight rather than being in the same room is benching. But in source number 17 here, the Shulchan Aruch about benching, he writes, v'im yesh, etc. V'yesh misha omer she'im reshus harabim mafsekes bein shtei abatim. If you have people in two different houses or two different rooms and they can see each other, they can join together. But if the reshus harabim is separating, if the public domain, the public road separates between the two houses, eina mitzdarfin b'shum inyan, then they can't join together at all. And the Taz, commenting the Shulchan Aruch, says, near the lav dafka reshus harabim mamish, doesn't need to be a technical reshus harabim with all the regulations of that certain width, a certain volume. Ela afilu shvil hayachid mafsik beineim. Even an individual's path. If you have a pathway between two houses that some person owns, it's not like it's two parts of one house or two parts of one property, but it's someone else's road that can also separate between the two houses. So this would pose a problem potentially for people making a minyan across a street. So now let's go to the recent positions, some of the rulings that we've seen really over just the past month on these issues as social distancing regime took effect and people had to figure out how they might make a minyan without a shul. So the most prominent position in this whole discussion took an early stance to allow these minyanim is Rav Moshe Sternbach of the Eda Haredis. The letter was published on Ches Nisan. But I had heard the ruling a couple weeks before that even, so really over a month ago, had ruled that it's permissible to make minyanim on porches or on mirpasot. And we'll take a close look at his reasoning. Just keep in mind, Rav Moshe Sternbach is not known as a big makil. He's not the most lenient among decisors. He very often has stringencies. And that's often he's known for very creative stringencies. He's very very analytic and thoughtful halachist with a tendency to stringency. In this case, he's lenient. So let's take a look at what he has to say. And again, I cut pieces from his decision and all the other ones we're going to see just for reasons of time and space. So he writes, "B'mkomos behem yeshna masar shchenim aroim elu es elu derech hachalon omer peses beisam." You have people who see each other across their windows or across their balconies. V'kulam shomim es hashat she'omi b'soch beis. So everyone can hear the Chazan, Yuchel Yitztarif Laminyan Ali Deitziruf Deroim Elos Elu Ukimivur B'Mishnah Brura. They can join together with a minyan, just like the Mishnah Brura said. We just read that Mishnah Brura, it's permitted to have a minyan if you can see each other, even if you're not in the same room or building. Umekoro midivrei harashba. But Shuman, based on the Rashba that we saw, and he says, "V'hein emes to b'bir halacha hasham kasav the yoser tov lahachmir." But it's better not to rely on this. Came the Rashba gufe lo kasav kein over. Actually, the Rashba himself isn't sure. Aval benidon didan davishas halchak. In our case, which is one of great difficulty, yesh lismoch al zeh, we can rely on this position. So it's not the ideal. It's not the ideal, certainly, to have a minyan that's not in person. That's only over through seeing each other, not in the same building. But one can rely on it if necessary. Umihu nira. Kevan sheharashba gufe lo kasav kain elo b'derech efshar. The Rashba himself wasn't certain. He said maybe, and we're relying on that position. But some disagree with the Rashba and say you can't rely on this. The opinions, some of which we saw, some of which we didn't. There's many that say you can't join together across different houses. And the Ramban, im kain roi shashatz Yosef Tanai she'im ein mitzdarfin tehei tfilaso nedava. This is sort of a little bit of a cheat to hedge the bets. That the Chazan, usually if you have a minyan, if you daven with a minyan, you have chazaras hashatz. You repetition of Shmona Esrei. That's a whole lot of brachas that you're saying that you wouldn't ordinarily say. And if it turns out that you don't have a minyan, those are bracha levatala. That's a wasted bracha. You're saying God's name in vain because if you don't have a minyan, you shouldn't be doing chazaras hashatz. So here's the hedge, which is the chazan, the person reading the Shmona Esrei should have in mind that if it turns out that this minyan is illegitimate, which it might be, according to many Rishonim, it is illegitimate. If it turns out that this minyan is illegitimate, his Shmona Esrei should be a tfilas nedava, should be a voluntary additional Shmona Esrei, which one's allowed to do. The general practice is not to, but it's technically permitted to have a voluntary Shmona Esrei. So you should have that in mind to hedge the bet. If it turns out that the Rashba is wrong, this isn't chazaras hashatz, this is an additional optional voluntary Shmona Esrei, so it's not a bracha levatala. So you see, Rav Sternbuch here is not so sure. He says to do it, he says you can rely on it, but he says to hedge your bet. And he continues, what if there's a path between the houses, which we just saw in the Shulchan Aruch, the idea of the road, a Rishus Harabim, a public or even a private domain separating, near the Rishas Chagzu, yesh lahakel dem mitzdarfim, rakim omdim, b'mirpasos hagvohos l'mala me'asar tfachim. So he has a very creative solution to this problem, right? What if you have, let's say, 5 apartments here, 5 apartments here. You need both sides to make the minyan across this road. How do you do it? The way to do it, he says, is by making sure, or you can only count people who are on a mirpeset, on a balcony, that are 10 tfachim above the ground. On the ground level, it won't work because you have the Rishus Harabim. But above the ground level, on the mirpeset that's in the air, that's above 10 tfachim, that's not considered a Rishus Harabim. It's not considered a public domain. He explains that a bit lower here. If you're above 10 tfachim, the road in between doesn't separate. Because this is a principle he borrows from Shabbos, from the laws of carrying in public on Shabbos. The public domain only extends up 10 tfachim, about 3 feet. Be higher than that, it's not considered the public domain. That's airspace. It has a whole different status. So the only separation you're going to have between 2 houses is on the ground level. But anything higher than the ground level, above 10 tfachim, there's no separation because the Rishus Harabim doesn't extend into the air. It's a very creative idea. One could have argued and said, well, that definition of Rishus Harabim is for Shabbos and for carrying. Here we're trying to define if something is one property or not. And that this would still divide them. One could have argued like that, but he's lenient and says you can have a minyan on balconies across the public domain as long as they're above 10 tfachim. And then he goes into a little bit of detail. When you say they need to see each other, what exactly does that mean? Who needs to see whom? And he says it all depends on the shots, on the shliach tzibur, that the chazan needs to see everyone, but that means that you end up with a bit of a complication, right? If everyone's facing the same direction and the chazan's in front, and then the chazan isn't seeing all the people. So you need to set it up such that the chazan can actually see the other people. So that's his resolution. We'll get into more details in a few minutes, but his basic position is you can count for a minyan. He relies on the leniency of the Mishnah Brura with the hedge that you should have in mind tonight a condition that if this is wrong, it should be a tefillas nedava, and you can do it across Rosh Hashanah as long as you're in the air. Very important decision that many people in Israel followed. Now, on the other side of this issue, I think the earliest and one of the stronger voices has been from Rav Herschel Schechter of YU. So we'll read much of his article or his short tshuva, his short response here on counting for a minyan. He starts out by talking to people. Everyone's on a mirpeset, and they're next to each other, and they can see each other. Yesh sheratzu lomar shemitztarfim lasara lomar dvarim shebekdusha v'chazar sashat. Some have said, referring to Shterma, some have said you can join up for 10 for a minyan for dvarim shebekdusha, Barchu, chazar sashat, all of those things. I'll read the Mishnah Berurah, based on the Mishnah Berurah. You can rely on this in situations of difficulty. He says though, and you note this comes from the Chida and the arguments there. Fine, and part of the idea is shlo yispat lo arba'im yom milomar kaddish v'kedusha. Yeah, this leniency. You don't want to go 40 days without saying kaddish or kedusha. That would be bad spiritually. So you can rely on these leniencies. Presumably here there's something similar. The risk of long term without minyan. Achein kulazu kashamod, but this is a very difficult leniency. And he says it's all based on the idea of zimun, right? As we saw in the Rashba, that he compares benching, joining to bench as a group, to joining as a minyan, to daven together. And he says the Rashba himself isn't sure, and it doesn't sound like this. But me pashtus kol gemaros mashma shel dvarim shebikdusha ba'inan shiu kol asar b'cheder echad. Sounds from all the gemaras you need a minyan in a room, and the zimun is different. That's not, zimun's not dvarim shebikdusha. Zimun is a different standard. So that's why by benching you can rely on seeing each other, but that has nothing to do with davening. Very, very weak to a line of argumentation. We shouldn't rely on this. And the Mishnah Berurah even notes that the Rashbash argues on the Rashba. There are other Rishonim who disagree. So even by benching, they disagree. So you certainly shouldn't rely on this here. He goes into some more detail. He draws a contradiction between the Mishnah Berurah in two different places. So even the Mishnah Berurah's position is not clear. And here he applies it to other areas, to situations similar to the one I faced in the Yale minyan. The harbe pa'amim kishe'osim minyan b'veis ha'avel. A lot of times when you have a minyan at a avel house, kishe'ashanim kitikunam, in a normal year when we can actually visit avelim in person. V'achadarim shama local kachdom. You have small rooms. V'yesh shmona mispalim b'cheder echa v'shiva b'cheder sheni. You have 8 people in this room, 7 in that room. And they say, well, they can see each other. It's good enough for a minyan. This is not right. We shouldn't rely on this of roim elu es elu. That is not a valid leniency under normal circumstances either, right? In a minyan in a avil house or any small area. And the same thing in shul. He says, same thing in shul. You have part of your minyan. You have less than a full minyan in the shul in the men's section, and you have less than a minyan in the women's section. They don't join together. That's not a minyan. You shouldn't do this. Fine. Then he talks about some other areas of Mikra Megillah and other Halakhic areas. We'll skip that for now. Right. So and in addition, you shouldn't have minyanim in just a field, open field, do social distancing. You shouldn't do that either because there is a certain danger you're entering. It's not worth the danger. Okay. I'll now take a couple of questions. It looks like there's a couple of questions in the chat, or at least yeah. So I'll read for the people who think that sight works. Do they think that everyone has to have the rest of the quorum in sight, or are they also allowing a chain of seeing? One person sees 5 others when these people themselves see 4 others works. I think there's a big dispute about how that works. Do you just need the chazan to see, or everyone has to see? If everyone has to see, they all need to see everyone. Does everyone need to see a minyan? They all need to see each other. I believe there's some debate about that, but I didn't bring in all the detailed questions. But it's a great question on details to be worked out by every minyan. Would seeing someone on a video screen be sufficient? So no one has raised that possibility here. Interestingly, for these purposes, we'll get to Rabbi Yitzchak Yosef talks about something similar. So hold that thought for a minute. Okay, so that's the most basic fundamental debate here. between Rav Sternbach and Rav Schechter, which is, should we rely on this leniency of the Mishnah Berurah? It's a leniency. It's not at all obvious from the, it seems to go against the Gemaras. It's relying on a Rashba who's not even sure. It goes against other Rishonim. It's not clear that the Mishnah Berurah himself is even fully on board with that position. So should we rely on that or not? That's the question here. Let's work out now some of the details here. So we talked about in the first source, talking about what's going on in Bnei Brak. It talks about people reading the Torah, doing Berchas Kohanim. So what about those? Can those easily be done, or is there some complication along the way? So Sternbach talks about reading the Torah, and think about this for a second, right? You're reading the Torah, so you have, let's say, one person with their Torah on their mirpeset, and you have a bunch of people on their other mirpesets. So think about how reading the Torah might or might not happen. Minyan kriyas Torah. Yuchel would start from a minyan, but open anal, right? You can, in terms of getting a quorum, it's the same as davening. Shiamdu b'mirpesos, you roim elos elu, seeing each other is sufficient. But what about getting an aliyah? In aliyah la Torah, ba'aliyah rishona yala balkori acher v'nimtzam v'vaiseh. First aliyah, the person with the Torah goes. The first few aliyahs, people who are there, go. That's easy to do. Ula'acharehem efshar l'chabed ba'aliyos es hashchenim v'nimtzam v'shar mirpesos sheshoma is kriyas Torah. What about, you have one or two people at this porch minyan, this porch, they already had their aliyos. What do you do now? Give aliyos to everyone else. Give an aliyah to Chaim Yankel down the block. So how does that work? You can't see the Torah. You can't read inside. You're supposed to read inside the Torah when you get an aliyah. It says you can rely on the gra, which is cited below. The summa yacholalos la Torah lididei afshe ino kori b'Torah. We Ashkenazim paskin that a summa, someone who's blind, is allowed to get an aliyah, even though they can't read the words. Getting an aliyah, you don't need to read the words. Why not? The shomea ke'ona, hearing the bracha and hearing the reading of the Torah in this case is like saying it. It's as if you read it. You don't need to read it because you heard it, and that's good enough. So even though you say the bracha, it's your aliyah to read the Torah. You don't need to read any words of the Torah with your eyes or with your mouth. As long as you hear the Baal Koreh reading it, that's sufficient. What about, usually people walk up to the Sefer Torah. That's honoring the Torah by going up to it to get an aliyah. Theoretically, though, you can get an aliyah a block away. And in fact, that's what Sternbach suggests that people do. Better to have the person a block away get an aliyah. That way you can have everyone get an aliyah instead of running out of people if you don't have enough people on the spot. Fine. And then he notes it's a chovas hatzibur. Fine, you don't have a personal obligation. So, but that's the way he suggests doing it. We'll take a look here. There's source 22. The Shulchan Aruch has a debate about whether a blind person can get an aliyah. The Shulchan Aruch, the Shulchan Aruch himself says Summa Eino Koreh. A blind person can't read the Torah. Lefishe Aser Likros Afilu Os Achas Shlomo Naksav. Even if he knows the Torah by heart. Torah Shvichsav Iya Torah Shayla Omer Baal Peh. We're supposed to read the Torah inside from a text. You're not supposed to read psukim by heart, certainly in Kriyas HaTorah, but in here, this is in italics, presumably from the Ramah, citing the Maharil, the founder of Minhagei Ashkenaz, or one of the main ones. Maharil kasad da'achshav korei summa, a blind person can get an aliyah. Kmo she'anu makrim b'Torah le'amaretz. It's just like we give an aliyah to someone who can't read, an amaretz, someone who's uneducated and can't read. He's not getting an aliyah. So Summa is no different. Summa also can't read. It should be the same thing. And therefore, a blind person can get an aliyah. And in fact, this is spelled out further in source 24 here. What if you have a shul where not everyone knows how to read the Torah? This is so a little bit of history. Originally, every person who got an aliyah would read their aliyah. This is how it still exists in some Edot Mizrach communities, but overwhelmingly, the way nowadays it works is one person lanes the whole parsha or parts of the parsha, and you get an aliyah. You're not reading it out loud. You're not necessarily even reading it quietly if you don't know how to do that. So this is talking about that sort of situation. You only have one person who knows the laning. Yivarech v'yikra ksas psukim v'yivarech la'achareim. Someone can have an aliyah v'chozer l'varech tchila v'korei ksas psukim v'yivarech la'achareim. V'chein yaseh kama pa'amim. So what do? You have the person who knows the laning gets all the aliyos. If no one else knows how to read, the person who lanes gets all the aliyos. That's the Shulchan Aruch. But the Mishnah Berurah points out, based on the Ramah that we saw, that it's better to have a new karma. Afilu amaretz, we give aliyos to the amaretz who doesn't know how to read, and afilu any of the likros achrei mikra, and that's better to do that. The imkein yishtane haidina to ledidan laolam tzarich likros shiva kruin. You want to get 7 different people to get aliyos. Better to have 7 different people get an aliyah but not read it than to have one person get all 7 aliyos and read them. Barchu, and each of those 7 people, they'll say the bracha, they won't read the Torah. So the person laning, the Baal Kriya, will lane for them, and that works. And how does it work? This is what Rav Sternbach said is Shomea Ke'ona. You're hearing the laning, it's as if you read it. So that's one approach. That's Rav Sternbach's approach. This has, there are other views. Rav Asher Weiss, who also has an important tshuva, allowing minyanim, porch minyanim or mirpeset minyanim. He himself, and we'll first look at this, then we'll look at his view there. The bottom paragraph here, Masha Kasav Echad Agdolim, what one of the greats wrote, referring to Rav Sternbach, the Kevan Shenogim Bnei Ashkenaz the Halo Summa Torah, just like a blind person getting aliyah. Huadin b'misha omi mirpeset sacheres. You can also get an aliyah to someone a block away on a different balcony. Ein der klal, this doesn't work. You need to go up. It's called an aliyah. You go up. You ascend, or at least you go towards the Torah and stand next to it. You can't do that at a distance. So he doesn't like that at all, and he says, he has an extended discussion, we're not quoting all of it. The person laning can get all the aliyos. Whoever's on that balcony can get aliyos. If it's just one person, that one person gets all the aliyos. People on other balconies don't get aliyos. That's just how you do it. Very simple. That's not our normal minhag. Usually we have different people get the aliyos. Okay, it doesn't make a difference. It's not, in this case, it's not necessary because there's no other option. Now, just before we go forward, we should take a look at Rav Asher Weiss's more general remarks about this in very short form. He has a lot to say, but he says, he talks about apartments. What about inside an apartment? Where let's say, let's say you don't have a mirpeset, but you want to have a minyan inside your apartment building. Your apartment building has multiple apartments, and whatever, let's say you have 10 apartments, and everyone, you have one representative per apartment, and you have your minyan in the hallway. So there's a whole question of, well, does the stairwell in an apartment building count as a different rishus, a different area, or like a road? Is it the equivalent of a road, a pathway, a thoroughfare to break up the minyan or not? So he says he doesn't. If it's an apartment building, this path is only for the people in the building. It's not only not a public road, it's not even really a private path, it's just your own property. That's what he says there. And then he throws in another line that I think is very important. This is a case of difficulty. It's not only difficult because it's hard to get a minyan, but he says, we're trying to avoid major dangers. Therefore, you shouldn't have people too close. A reason why he's being lenient here is not just in order to have a minyan, but if you don't allow this minyan, this apartment minyan or something like that, other people will actually congregate in person. So, if you tell people don't have a minyan at all, they'll end up congregating and will endanger each other. So it's better to say have a minyan that's a little iffy in order that people not create that danger. Very, very interesting perspective, incorporating public health into the discussion as well. We're running low on time, so we're going to have to skim through Rav Yitzchak Yosef, former Sephardic chief rabbi of Israel, current Sephardic chief rabbi of Yerushalayim, and current chief rabbi of Israel, Sephardic chief rabbi, who also does not like these minyanim. He goes through the whole discussion, all the achronim, all the commentators on the Shulchan Aruch, and he believes that the majority understand that seeing one another is not sufficient. You need to be in the same room. He says still, even though you're not in the same room as each other, as we saw, if there's a valid minyan going on elsewhere, you can sort of join. You can be the +1. So you can answer amen to their brachas or whatnot, although it doesn't really count as a minyan. But if a group of, he says Ashkenazim who can rely on the Mishnah Berurah, if a group of Ashkenazim relying on the Mishnah Berurah having a minyan, you can join in and say amen. But he has a better idea, and this touches on what someone suggested before. Yes. So Asher al Kain, here he writes, Amnam, Osam me'achenu Ashkenazim, Osam Klali Chosem, al Pipis Mishabur, you can do that. Fine. He says, Asher al Kain, Yesh Lishtadol, it starts Derech HaTelephone, B'Shidur Chai. It's possible to join by telephone in a live broadcast, in a live minyan, and presumably if a telephone, certainly Zoom. Leminyan Shal Asar Anim Tzayim B'Rishus Achas, a group of 10 people in one place, Shemiskayim B'Ishar Rishus, if it's done legally. And he says, come on, Minyan Achol, Shemishid B'Kav Halacha. There is news reports of these minyanim going on for people who already have coronavirus, who are in these hotels, to be quarantined in a hotel, but they already all are sick, so they can mix with each other. They would hold minyanim. So those are minyanim that are valid minyanim, that are legal minyanim. And there's apparently was one minyan at the Kotel. If you call in to that minyan, there's no problem at all with answering amen. Why? What's the standard for saying amen? If you have a valid minyan in one place, as long as you can hear them, you can say amen. And there's a lot of sources for this discussion in the Gemara about the shul in Alexandria. We're not going to go into all the details, but he says since this minyan is definitely good, it's a group of 10 in one place, it's better than a balcony minyan. So better to call in by phone to one of these in-person minyanim that are happening somewhere, rather than to say amen, rather than to say amen to a balcony minyan. He's not 100% sure that it counts as tefillah b'tzibur. It maybe counts as something, but so here he's not even sight. So he's not saying you certainly wouldn't be able to count as part of the core 10 of a minyan over phone or over Zoom, because that's certainly not sufficient. He doesn't even think sight in a direct sense is sufficient, but you can count as someone who hears it, who's hearing what's going on, and say amen. He talks about, well, what about what we saw in the Shulchan Aruch before? What if there's avodah zarah or something dirty along the way? But if you can't see it, that may be all right. But that's his view. He says he doesn't like balcony minyanim, and he says you can answer amen to and hear Shmon Esrei and etc. Hear Chazar Zashatz from a minyan in person over the phone, and that's even better than answering amen to a balcony minyan. Now, one quick word about Lakewood. Lakewood, as of 8 days ago, said that people could start having porch minyanim. They, in terms of Kriyas HaTorah, reading the Torah, they write, people should not get aliyos from other porches, even though there is a hora from a gadol saying that it is permitted. Even though Rosh Sternbach says you can get aliyos from other porches, we don't want to do that. They end up ruling like Rav Asher Weiss. But so that's their view, and you read the whole letter here. We'll go into some details. That's sort of a late addition to the discussion here. A quick line about Birchas Kohanim from Rav Sternbach, and this goes to show his position. If you recall, he says you could have the minyan, but it's sort of doubtful. So it's better to do a T'nai for Shmon Esrei. So he also says, even though in theory doing Birchas Kohanim should be the same standard as Shmon Esrei, as davening with everything else, Mihu came on the Yesh Cholkim al Rashba, since some disagree with the Rashba, with the argument that seeing is sufficient. Mutav shelifnei ritzei yisalik hakohen atzmo me'aminyan. It's better that you not do Birchas Kohanim, but it's unseemly, it's improper to skip Birchas Kohanim if you have Kohanim there. So the Kohanim should leave their porch halfway through Shemon Esrei, so as to not be there when you're skipping Birchas Kohanim. It's a problem if they're there and not doing it because there's a bracha. Bnei Israel. You should say Berachas Kohanim, but if you leave, you're not there. That you're resolved. Why does he not want them to do Berachas Kohanim? You don't want to enter a doubt of a bracha levatala. Remember, the Rashba himself was unsure as to whether this should be relied on. So it's a suffix. If you say a bracha of Berachas Kohanim, that might be an unnecessary bracha. Bracha levatala, that would be a problem. He says you should avoid that by not doing Berachas Kohanim. Wow. So that's, again, shows his view. He's somewhat, even though he's lenient, he's also very iffy about it. And now maybe the most powerful line of this whole discussion at the end of his psak, all of these decisions I'm writing based on my judgment. I don't have sources. No one talks about our situation. I'm doing the best I can to draw inferences from the existing sources, but there are no sources that talk about our situation. We need to think about this more. This is our preliminary decision. We need a decision now, so this is it, but there's a lot to think about. There's a lot of open questions here. Very powerful to see the Halakhic process in action, a new situation that never has come up. at least not at this scale and not with these details. Poskim grappling with it, coming to very different conclusions. You can have a minyan and do everything, which some say. You can have a minyan, but don't do Berachas Kohanim. Or if you're doing Kriyas HaTorah, do it have someone say a bracha from across the street or not. All of these details are being worked out in real time just over the past month or so. For the last few minutes, we'll try to understand what exactly is, or one of the things that's at stake here. What's going on? Why is there this machlokas? So part of it is how to evaluate the various sources. What does the Shulchan Aruch really mean? How much should we rely on the Rash? But that's one aspect of the psak. But there's another aspect of the psak that's you could call it a public policy set of concerns as well. So let's think about that for a minute. In order to do that, it may help to think about other issues, other discussions, other disputes about how to have minyanim. And very much in summarizing, there's an article in the Times of Israel talking about how online services mean many synagogues are seeing greater attendance. This is mostly was talking about non-Orthodox synagogues that now they're seeing their numbers go up during the week. In some cases, they're what they would hold on Shabbos as well. But having the opportunity to have online minyanim, not over porches, but over Zoom, is something that's a real opportunity for a lot of shuls in different ways. So that's one thing that's been happening is Zoom minyanim. We're not going to talk now about a Zoom minyan of trying to get actually count for a minyan. I don't know of any Orthodox community that says that a Zoom minyan, where you have a group of 10 only seeing each other over Zoom, counts. So at least within the Orthodox community, that's not something that's been done, counts to be a full minyan. But there are a couple of other things that have been developed that are, to count for quorums for certain things, not a full minyan. So Rabbi Seth Winberg has an article saying you don't need Zoom or Skype to say Kaddish without a minyan. And he summarizes here a few different approaches. First of all, he summarizes Rabbi Yitzchak Yosef, that you can join via phone, or he says the web, which I don't think Rabbi Yosef mentions, but it would logically follow. To have a minyan, Rav Melamed has, based on Rav Melamed, some have argued, and I quote the decision below, we're not going to read it here, that it's possible to have Kaddish over Zoom. Why? Because Kaddish isn't really, if you do Kaddish without a minyan, it's not so bad. It's not a bracha of atala. So, there's room to allow for that in cases where someone feels a real need to say Kaddish. You can have Kaddish over Zoom, even though it's not actually a minyan. There's a small chance that it's a minyan. We can't rely on that but if there's no stakes, there's nothing at stake, there's no risk. Worst case scenario, he said a lot of things praising God, but it's not a bracha of atala. It's not a saying God's name in vain, then we can allow that. There's a lot of suggestions. Rabbi Winberg himself suggests, instead of saying the usual Kaddish, saying these prayers, these sort of modified Kaddish that are, based on Psukim, are based on other formulations that are not the standard Kaddish. And these can be said over Zoom, and there's groups. He notes there's a minyan, Rabbi Benjamin Samuels in the Boston area, has a group, they learn Torah together, they daven together, not as a minyan, but just as a group davening together, and they have Kaddish of these modified forms of Kaddish, which don't actually need a minyan. So I guess the question here is, what exactly is at stake? And is there some connection between the development in the Haredi community of allowing, with this great leniency of allowing porch minyanim, and at the same time, a parallel development in Dati Leumi, in modern Orthodox communities, of coming up with ways to have Kaddish, either Kaddish proper over Zoom, or some modified version that isn't exactly Kaddish. What exactly is going on here? So my thought was, at least one thought is, in addition, there's two different issues here. One is the idea of davening with a minyan. Davening with a minyan is very important, but as in source 34 here, we're not going to read it inside. Rav Asher Weiss says, and this seems to be the main position, although some disagree, davening with a minyan is not a choba. It's not an obligation. It's something one should strive to do. It's very important. You're going to have a hard time finding a rabbi saying it's not important. It's very important, but it's not an absolute obligation. So given that, if it's really not an obligation, you think, why are people going out of their way to rely on leniencies and to possibly have a bracha of atala in order to have minyan? I think and part of the story here is that in addition to the halakhic obligation for minyan and qualifying for minyan, there's also, for many people, there's a deep personal connection to minyan. People really feel, I've been davening with a minyan my whole life. I never miss a minyan. What makes me a very serious, frum, observant person is the fact that I daven regularly with a minyan. That's central to my identity. And if you say to those people, there's no way of having a minyan at all for the next month, for the next 2 months, or however long this lasts, that would be extremely difficult for them. That would hurt their religiosity, hurt their religious practice. Afterwards, who's to say they'll be able to come back? So there's a lot of reasons for people, certainly in the Haredi community, for people to feel like they have an opportunity of davening with a minyan. And in parallel, I'd say there are some people like that in the Dati Leumi community and the modern Orthodox community. I'd say the number is smaller, but there is also a group of people who feel a very deep need to have Kaddish. Saying Kaddish is meaningful for them religiously, it's meaningful for them in terms of their connection to their family, and they really need that. You can't take Kaddish away from them. And in both cases, in parallel, in the Haredi world, you're finding leniencies and workarounds in order to allow for having minyan, even if it's not so simple, even if it's a kula, even if it's a leniency. And in the modern Orthodox and Dati Leumi community, you're finding workarounds and ways of having Kaddish or something similar to Kaddish, because people really need to have that experience of Kaddish. One final thought, which is the places where these minyanim are happening, for obvious reasons, the porch minyanim are happening, are places where there's extremely densely populated by observant Jews. It wouldn't work otherwise, right? If you had one observant Jewish family per building, you wouldn't be able to have a porch minyan. And part of the question here of why it's taken off in the Haredi world, but this hasn't happened so much certainly in the America, in modern Orthodox communities. Part of it, of course, relates to the psukim, the different decisions that are made. But part of it is also a pragmatic matter. It'd be hard in a community that's spread out, that doesn't have a dense enough population. It would be basically impossible to do this. So this is also only a possibility in the parts of the Haredi world. But I think the deepest explanation of this is, as we said, that more than Jews need to daven with a minyan, halachically, there's that deep feeling among many that they need to be able to connect to a minyan, they need to be able to say Kaddish in different scenarios. And even though it's a dubious proposition, it's very complicated, it's not clear that this can be relied on, but the Rabbanim, the decisors, push to find ways to have a minyan. Even if it might be a minyan, it might not be, it's a little dubious, it's a little questionable. Rav Sternbach tries to hedge all his bets, cover his bases as much as possible to minimize the halakhic risk, but even Rav Sternbach is able to find a way to allow for minyan in this case. So that's the end of the presentation. Happy to take some questions. Looks like someone sent me a question. Why is sight the determinant for a zimun and therefore minyan if hearing is the important part of the brachos and aliyah and getting aliyah and other aspects of minyan? So why does sight matter? I think the reason why sight matters is that it's about forming cohesion. So there's really two different, I guess, to form the basic quorum of the minyan, you need to have a group that's together. If you have a group that's separate, that you can't be a minyan. You can't have the basic quorum of a minyan. So for that, you need to either be in the same room, or according to some, sight makes you connected in that way. Hearing, that's less useful for forming the core minyan, but hearing, as Rabbi Yitzchak Yosef said, hearing is important for joining up to an existing minyan. Why? Because hearing is what allows you to hear the bracha or hear the Shmoneh Esrei. So once that's already happening and has the imprimatur, has the stamp of being a valid minyan, as long as you hear it from the outside, you can join up to it under normal circumstances. But you can't form that basic quorum. Hearing is not enough to form a community. I think there's a certain intuition to this, right? We connect to people that we see very frequently. There's something more intimate about sight than about hearing for those purposes. Other questions? Okay, if we don't have other questions, we'll call it here. We should all be so lucky to be zocha that all those who are sick with coronavirus are healed, and we should all be safe, and we should be able to return to davening in our regular minyanim in the natural and safe way very, very soon.